That system was for rubbish. I'm giving it back. Give me my money back. Chris Wilson, the general contractor's supervisor, deemed the system under quality check to be worthless after merely glancing at it. The stress I had been experiencing broke at that very instant. All right, let's pretend it never happened. As requested by Chris, I removed the system from the server. Why must I put up with this treatment when I've worked so hard to improve the system? Chris used to phone me nonstop after he left the job. He contacted after 3 days, saying, "Hey, you do something about this." "What are you talking about?" Then I heard Chris's terrified voice, and it made me giggle uncontrollably. "You destroyed the system, which is why it's a disaster. Come visit our business immediately." This was the time to make amends with Chris and put an end to everything. I felt like a hero entering combat as I stepped through the company's door. I'm a 42-year-old system engineer named David. Creating and designing computer systems that clients require is my responsibility. I've always been interested in machinery, therefore I found engineering to be a fulfilling profession. It is reassuring to spend time each day working hard in front of the computer. I committed myself to doing the work that the prime contractor business asked me to do. For this project, a New York hair salon's ordering and sales administration system had to be built. To take on this job, my colleague Joseph Anderson and I formed a team. Unlike me, Joseph is intelligent and has excellent communication abilities. Having Joseph around is comforting for someone like myself, who finds it difficult to communicate. Let's do our best again this time. Yeah, let's make something great. Joseph was staring at the monitor with all of his motivation. My aspirations to carry on working in this positive atmosphere were dashed by a phone call. It was the prime contractor company's sales manager, Chris Wilson. About 2 months ago, Chris received a promotion to sales manager. He is aggressive, constantly misreads the situation, and acts haughtily towards subordinates. He is uncommunicative and lacks confidence in his ability to interact with others. Chris appears to think I've got him. He always makes snarky comments about my gloomy expression when we get together. He probably wants to say something sarcastic again if he's phoning me. He made a scathing comment, so I unwillingly picked up the phone. "Hey, I assume all is good with you. I should be thanking me for getting this deal for you." My gut tightened at Chris's scary opening statement. These are typically handled by staff members in the sales department, but on this occasion, Chris is personally in charge of us. Well, the work has just started, so I can't say much yet. With a deep sigh, Chris screamed at me, and my voice quarreled in response. How pitiful that voice is. You're not even able to thank me. You will be held accountable if this puts the client through any difficulties or results in damages. Get ready. My heart was racing long after the call had finished, but I started to restore my composure as soon as I went back to the laptop and began typing. Joseph gave me a worried look, but I pretended to be all right by nodding. Chris, however, kept getting in the way, which made it impossible for me to do this project efficiently. We worked nonstop for a month, holding numerous meetings with the client to develop the ordering and sales administration system for the hair salon. Calling Chris with questions was useless, even though it's usually the sales team's responsibility to pay close attention to the client's needs. Can't you just ask them yourself? I'm busy. I recognized that Chris, as the manager, had additional duties. Could you please assign someone else if you're too busy? Attending to the client is not a responsibility of mine. I told Chris so explicitly over the phone, and he screamed. Switch the person in command. Speaking like that when you're only a subcontractor, who do you think you are? I can end the agreement at any time. For a split second, I considered canceling the deal in order to save my sanity. After a month of meetings and learning of the client's requirements, though, I was unable to simply stop for my own convenience. I would disappoint Joseph, who had put in a lot of work with me, if I gave up. I swallowed my rage at Chris's irrational actions, yet it was there. I'm sorry. All right. There are 2 months left until the deadline, so finish your work on time. I sank back in my chair, and Joseph spoke to me when the phone ended. Creating a fantastic system is all we can do. Let's prove Chris is mistaken. Yeah, you're right. We worked against the clock for the next 2 months, giving careful thought to what the client desired from the system. After overcoming multiple iterations of the specification and testing, the system was almost finished, and the end was finally in sight. Chris, with whom we had largely spoken over the phone, showed up at our office while we were resolving bugs and compiling support procedures. Is it not finished yet? You're moving slowly. The deadline is almost here. Not disguising his annoyance, Chris threw his luggage on the ground and shook his body. To make sure the system functions properly, we're testing. We're not putting things off. While it's important to test the system for correct functionality, Chris is merely putting pressure on us to get things done quickly. Let me check. I am sufficiently knowledgeable about systems. Chris smiled, glanced at the display, and then uttered something that seemed impossible. It's a system of waste. I'm giving it back. Return my money, please. Chris broke the anxiety I was feeling by declaring the system under quality check to be garbage with only a quick glance. Chris had always intimidated me, but I stopped caring about it now. All right, let's pretend it never happened. I removed the system from the server per Chris' request, even though it took more than 3 months to develop, including design. I could create something similar on my own. You subcontractors think you're so important, yet your services are no longer required. Chris thought he was done with us and left in good spirits. Joseph and I had put a lot of effort into making the system excellent, and we watched him go. Why, therefore, did we merit this treatment? I balled my fists and thought about what to do. This is where the real fight begins, I remarked, giving Joseph a slap on the shoulder as he bit his lip in frustration. Joseph, I need your assistance. Eyes wide, Joseph excitedly nodded at my proposal before turning to the computer. Chris began phoning me nonstop 3 days after he quit the company. After ignoring it for a while, the unceasing ringing made me grudgingly answer. Hey, you fix this. What are you talking about? Chris's voice was frenetic, as I would have imagined, and it made me giggle deep inside. You deleted the system, which is why everything is a disaster. Come visit our business right now. 2 train stops away from our place was Chris's company, so Joseph and I headed there. We were going to make Chris apologize and settle the score. Entering the business, I had the feeling of a hero entering combat. Johnson, the president of the prime contractor company, was pacing about in the lobby, looking pale. His eyes narrowed, showing his rage at seeing our expressions. Which of the 2 Chris described are you? Visit the office of the president. Johnson personally escorting us to the Oval Office was extraordinary. I was uncomfortable since there were murmurs from the staff in the lobby. Tightly clutching his suitcase, Joseph soothed me by patting my shoulder. Chris was in the president's office. He arched his brow, seeming tired, unlike his normal haughty demeanor. Johnson motioned for me and Joseph to settle onto the couch before giving Chris a fierce look. Chris, explain the situation to them again. Yes. Chris hesitated before speaking, using a handkerchief to dab at the perspiration on his large brow. This subcontractor engineer from David's company created a poorly designed system. David became enraged when I pointed it out, erased the almost completed system, and threatened to charge me for it. I had to create the program myself because the deadline was drawing near. I couldn't believe Chris's blatant falsehoods. I got up and vehemently refuted what he said. That is untrue. Yes, I did remove the system, but Chris told me to do so. Chris gave me a sneer while Johnson listened in silence. Yes, you did remove it. You're the reason our business is in disarray. My laboriously created system isn't functioning, and we won't make the delivery date. Our reputation is completely destroyed. Chris bragged that he could design one himself by simply entering in the text, dismissing the system we came up with as garbage. He was genuinely ignorant of the intricacies involved in system design. Any system built in 3 days would undoubtedly have many problems, I realized. Chris was now pleading with Johnson, tears welling up in his eyes. Our sales department has lost a lot of money because of these two. They ought to be made to answer right away. I was furious when I saw Chris's helpless demeanor and Johnson's severe expression. It was shocking to me that the talks to extend the deadline had broken down because I had found the customer for this project to be so accommodating. What kind of harm had Chris brought about during the system's design process? It appears that David is primarily to blame if Chris, an incompetent system designer, attempted to build the system and ultimately deleted a significant portion of the sales department's customer data, which led to the failure of the customer management system. What do you think? Observing our perplexed looks, Johnson lowered his voice and inquired. It's likely that Chris altered their client management system in order to create his design. Defects must have resulted from his damage to the crucial data system. This company's customer management system is likewise managed by our organization. It might function if we examine the backup data and make system fixes. At my comments, Chris's face lit up and his eyes expanded. You need to have said that sooner. I was worried, but in vain. This time Joseph approached Chris, who was behaving caustic as usual. More significantly, Chris didn't have to design the system. That was not our job. Kindly make that correction. Chris was startled as Joseph slammed his fist into the table. I told Johnson. Chris called our almost completed system trash and told us to delete it, following Joseph's example. On Chris's behalf, we'd have been meeting with the client and carefully designing the system. We never made any threats to do harm. Chris argued back at us as he leaned forward. There isn't any evidence. You're just concocting this. President, don't fall for their tricks. Joseph took out a tiny gadget from his backpack, having been waiting for this. Putting it in front of Chris, he exclaimed, "We have proof. We use a voice recorder all the time because we can't afford to write notes while working." This recorder was running the day Chris ordered the system to be removed. I'll play it for you, please. Pale now, Chris looked from the device to us and back again, unable to speak. I had Joseph examine the voice recorder the day Chris forced me to erase the system because I thought he may shift the responsibility later. Chris's audio was captured for everything he said, including calling the system garbage and requesting a refund. Johnson listened, shaky with rage, as Chris's unreasonable and oppressive comments filled the president's office. Chris, this is nothing like what you told me at all. Your actions have caused our company to suffer large damages. Chris was very pallid, and Johnson roared at him, his rage finally erupting. But David is the one who actually deleted the system. Chris muttered an apology, as if he didn't realize what he had done. Chris, you are aware of the Subcontract Act. The Fair Trade Commission may be notified of any unjust returns or the prime contractor's reluctance to accept the products. The purpose of the Subcontract Act in the United States is to safeguard subcontractors, who frequently find themselves at a disadvantage when competing with prime contractors. Therefore, both parties need to abide by the requirements and execute a valid contract. Under the Subcontract Act, Chris's unilateral demand to erase the system was illegal. Such a transgression can lead to a lawsuit against the entire business. The scenario is not advantageous for the prime contractor given our evidence and the audio recording. We will notify the relevant authorities about Chris's unfair treatment of us. Chris's face briefly flushed red at my words, but it quickly turned white under Johnson's enraged look. Chris trembled and bit his lip. President Johnson, would you kindly check this? Joseph produced a copy of the document outlining the subcontractor fees for this project as well as the contract made in Chris's name very fast. Joseph used this as his advantage to corner Chris. Johnson scowled as he closely studied the papers Joseph had given him. We used our own accounting to verify the subcontractor fees. If this project was terminated, how much damage would be done? That was our question. We attentively checked the things and discovered something strange after noticing a small difference between the amount indicated in the contract and the actual amount. Joseph became aware that the payment was smaller than anticipated and concentrated on the expenses Chris had specified for fees and business coordination management. It was clarified after speaking with accounting that the management expenses were incurred when arranging business between the client and the subcontractor on holidays or outside of usual business hours as a result of system upgrades or deadline modifications. The management costs are a result of the erratic activities that prime contractors occasionally need to take. But there had never been any fee-based transactions or requests for Chris to oversee any work. Put otherwise, Chris was trying to arbitrarily reduce the payment amount by deducting these fictional jobs from the subcontractor payments, which is against the Subcontract Act as well. Can you give President Johnson a clear explanation of these tasks? Chris fell silent in shock, not realizing we would delve this far. He gave Joseph a long, scowling look before shaking his head and lowering his shoulders in surrender. He dropped himself at Johnson's feet the following instant, pleading, "This discrepancy is my mistake. I had no intention of stealing any money." When Joseph saw the normally haughty Chris groveling on the ground, he looked triumphant. "You're apologizing to the wrong people, Chris." Chris spoke not a word of regret to us, not sure if it was because he disregarded Johnson's suggestion or was just too obstinate to concede our point. "David, Joseph, I truly apologize for what Chris did. We'll see to it that he pays for his unlawful actions." Johnson apologized profusely to us as he got up from the president's chair. His bearing demonstrated his readiness to assume accountability in his role as president. "Kindly lift your head. Yes, that makes sense. Let the appropriate authorities handle the rest." Chris gave Johnson an incredulous expression as he glanced at him while he apologized. Though I was grateful for Johnson's leadership in managing the matter, I still had concerns for Chris. "Chris, may I ask why you took on this assignment personally as the director of the department? Could you not have given it to a lower-level employee?" Chris ignored my question and appeared to have taken a bitter pill. Chris and I were both surprised when Johnson burst out laughing. "David, are you aware of your standing in our industry?" With a bewildered expression on my face, I turned to face Joseph, who grinned and responded to Johnson's query. "Someone described David as a super engineer, I've heard. I had no idea that President Johnson was also familiar with this moniker." "That's accurate. David is referred to be a great engineer because he completes every project with perfection and offers first-rate aftercare. I questioned whether you were the super engineer when I saw your name listed as the project lead." Joseph beamed happily, but Johnson looked impressed, and I was perplexed. "I'm honored if that's what people call me. I had no idea." Chris had been apologizing quietly, but as soon as I spoke in earnest, he sprang up and kicked the president's desk in front of me. "It's inappropriate to elevate a depressing subcontractor like you to the status of super engineer. You wouldn't have any work if we didn't get the jobs." A stinging tightness ran through my body when I saw how angry Chris was, and he told me not to get carried away. Chris used to constantly threaten me and make snarky remarks, and it dawned on me that this was his way of protesting the attention I was getting in this field. "Mr. Chris, we could say the same thing. Sales cannot happen without the systems we design, and it is our technical expertise that enables you to make proposals to other businesses." Chris appeared to be having trouble coming up with something to say to me. His head was almost full. "David is accurate. Instead, then competing to determine which is better, engineering and sales should help one another. Although I don't understand Chris' behavior toward David, you really need to adjust your viewpoint." Chris looked disheartened and slouched his shoulders when Johnson stated this firmly. Chris continued to look dissatisfied, and I couldn't get rid of the uneasy feeling I had. Then a theory on Chris' actions occurred to me. Is it possible that Mr. Chris set up this project in order to damage my reputation? Although I hoped my theory was incorrect, Johnson appeared to have everything worked out perfectly. Chris replied with a sly smile and a snort. Your reputation has taken a hit because the system for this project has been removed, but I still wanted to reveal your actual self and shed light on that unfair moniker. It does you justice." Johnson and Joseph watched with painful looks as Chris laughed uncontrollably. A wave of rage swept through me at Chris for almost letting personal jealousy destroy this effort. "You wasted the client's system over something so petty." I think this was the first time I'd ever called out to defy Chris. Chris stopped his spooky laughter, wide-eyed with amazement. "I don't think I have the best talents, but I never stop working hard for my clients. I cannot remain silent when that promise is being broken." This client had put a great deal of work into expanding their salon. All Joseph and I had done was transfer that hope into the architecture of the system. Chris had not only stopped doing his sales work, but he had also harassed me by taking advantage of the client. I could not stand such behavior, and my blood boiled with wrath. There isn't a problem even though the system was momentarily erased, because we have verified that the backup is complete. We'll finish this project in an ethical manner. Mr. Chris ought to suffer the proper repercussions. I smiled, forcing myself to control my fury, and Chris clenched his teeth in irritation. Oh no. I mistook it for being removed. Joseph and I hurriedly left the president's office, feeling rejuvenated as his hateful voice reverberated throughout. Joseph and I exchanged high fives as we departed from Chris's company, clearly happy. We now had to get back to our business, fix the system, and start testing again. Johnson had requested that we additionally take care of the sales department's client management system. "Let's grab a meal first." "Yes, I would like to eat something filling. We will require the energy." After that, we ate enormous bowls of beef bowls at a shop near the station and returned to our group. We had finally finished fixing the system a week after the Chris incident. Although our design system was promptly restored, it proved to be extremely difficult to reconstruct the customer management system that Chris had damaged. I screamed in disgust when we discovered that the system was lacking important components in addition to typos. The staff members in the sales department were likewise incensed with Chris, lamenting his unprofessional demeanor and condescending manner toward his colleagues. Chris was eventually disciplined based on our findings and the opinions of the employees. Now that the project and Johnson's desire had been fulfilled, Joseph and I were toasting with a drink in a beer hall. Did you hear about Chris, by the way? President Johnson, incensed with this episode, demoted him. After we brought the issue to the attention of the Fair Trade Commission, he resigned from the company, and the prime contractor company was promptly the subject of an investigation. When accounting informed Joseph and me that the right amount had been paid for Johnson's request for Chris' project, we both sighed with relief. Well, maybe it's a blessing we weren't sued for damages. Chris was demoted from his position as sales manager, treated poorly by his peers, and ultimately quit the company because he could no longer take it. Johnson then informed us that Chris would have been held liable for the damages if we hadn't finished this project. I've heard that since leaving the company, he hasn't been able to obtain employment. He was a sales manager, but he departed with no real accomplishments, and it would be hard for him to get another sales position given his haughty demeanor. I was relieved to see Chris walking past the job office 5 days later, his eyes empty and free of the stress and worry he had instilled in me. Joseph playfully said to me, "Hey, super engineer, we need your help with this new system," as he brought in a new project. Don't call me like that. With this initiative, we're back at our keyboards creating a future where everyone can be happy. I want to keep working with my partner to improve the future of the United States of America.